Morning, Carlo.
Morning, Jeff.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. All right, two quick disclaimers to start off with. One, the views I'm about to share this morning are my own. They don't represent PwC. And then second, I'm really feeling like a double threat here this morning. I have both a collared shirt and long pants on, so all set.
Ooh, that's exciting. Well, thanks for joining me today. So, Carlo, where do you see the office market going?
Yeah, I really feel the office market is in a point of transition right now. And the catalyst is really all of the forced remote work that businesses are having to do right now. And the one term that I'm sure a lot of your audience has read, but is not going away, is hybrid workforce. So we'll come to that a few times over our short discussion this morning. But tenants right now are trying to evaluate. We're talking post-COVID, the hybrid workforce that they plan to either by choice have, or maybe by the ability that they have. So some companies pre-COVID might have been set up in a very mobile fashion. Maybe everybody had a laptop, they could come into the office or not. But now with the forced remote work, it's kind of opened up a lot of new windows, a lot of new technologies. And companies post-COVID are having to evaluate how often they anticipate their employees coming back in. So that's one term that's not going away. And that's going to lead us to the other big point of transition, which is flexibility. And when I say that term, I mean things like lease terms, size, optionality within leases, and even composition of space, whereby maybe pre-pandemic, there was a heavy weight toward individual workspace. I think as companies and tenants think past the pandemic, what's that mix? What's that composition or space mix?
That's great. Thank you. And I think you coined it, don't rinse and repeat, and which is a great name. Thank you, by the way. What I'm hearing from chief appraisers and reviewers, there's a disconnect. Reviewers, and again, that's a little anecdotal, but I'm hearing a lot of stories of appraisers are mentioning COVID, but they're not really addressing it through DCF, cap rate, risk, sublease, what have you. And a lot of chief appraisers think their appraisers really are adjusting for COVID and its impact. So how do you see this impacting just the valuation in general?
Yeah, I think the top of mind assumptions that I think are going to impact the valuation world, it starts with renewal probability and the assumptions associated with that renewal. As a tenant, that's the first time that we contractually can come back to the table, right? We're bound by a current lease. And upon that end of lease term, then we can really negotiate with the landlord. And if you take all those sound bites I mentioned, that the market's in transition and all the items that we're looking for in terms of flexibility, when we come back and really negotiate upon that renewal, that's really where I think a lot of the rubber is going to meet the road, if you will. So the probability, and this is where I think this is a key takeaway that I have, is really understanding your tenant themselves, your key tenants within the building. And if you're able to evaluate their ability to have a hybrid workforce, I think that may lend itself to a renewal probability spectrum. So if a tenant is able to be more hybrid, they may likely require less space going forward, right? Or in maybe an extreme scenario, be able to not renew at all, walk away and have their workforce be entirely mobile. So renewal probability is one, and those associated assumptions with that. And, if you just previously assume that, this landlord has 7-year leases, that's their standard, and that's what it's going to be upon renewal every time, I would ask that, maybe that's considered with a little bit more scrutiny. I think tenants across the board are looking for flexibility. The immediate way they can get that is in lease term. Maybe it's a 3-year deal, 5-year deal, something less than a previous standard. And that has trickle down effects when you start doing some of your financial modeling, whether that's increased concessions, maybe over the course of a hold period, one space is going to roll a few times now, where before maybe it only came up once. So That's where I'd start. And then another maybe lesser known set of assumptions to consider is around these ancillary revenue streams. The best example is parking. This is a little pain point for a lot of tenants right now, where maybe under their current lease, contractually, they're obligated to pay for parking. But you can imagine, as a tenant who largely is not coming into an office, not only do they have their occupancy expense for their space, but they also have parking. And this is one, when you think about a tenant profile and maybe those same set of employees isn't coming in every day, maybe that instead they're going to come in once or twice a week. Well, then they're going to immediately ask themselves, well, does my leadership team need a parking space every day that I'm going to contractually pay for? Or is there a way that I can approach the landlord and restructure that? Maybe it's a pay as you go. Maybe I just need a whole lot less spaces. So building off the tagline, Jeff, rinse and repeat. If you just see an old parking revenue stream that's somewhat substantial, that's a potential needle mover in your model, something to consider going forward. What's the likelihood that tenant's just going to accept that same contractual terms, or are they going to look for more flexibility in their lease and try and tie more of those amenities to more of an as-needed basis based on their occupancy?
Right. Do you also think that there's maybe a shadow sublease market that's going on? And if there is, how does it impact the valuation?
Yeah, great question. I would say short answer, yes. More so than a shadow sublease market, depending on which MSA you're in, I'd say it's active. There's already space that I've heard of coming into the market. So it's a tough one, because I think macro level, it's probably going to mean that pricing's coming down, right? More, simple supply and demand. More supply is going to probably push pricing down. It is going to be case by case, and at a more micro level, I think it's going to be an individual decision for each tenant. So if a tenant's truly going to say not renew in a certain building and look at sublease space across the way, why? Is it to get more space? Is it a better building? Maybe it's just they get a lot cheaper pricing. And I think the big give and take that I see right there is, are they willing to take the space as is? So it goes back to that. The takeaway for the valuation world is really understand your tenant base. And if that tenant is a company that can take just, say, blank space and get up and running quickly, I think they're, the stickiness or the renewal probability of them staying in place is less so than someone that really wants their own unique individual space.
Okay, great. And since I'm running low on coffee, this will be your last question.
Sounds good.
Very low. So how does it fit within the lender, the tenant, and the landlord bucket?
Yeah, so this is one I do think right now, and we're filming this in January of 2021. So right now, what I've observed and what I've heard is there's a bit of a disconnect between kind of where a tenant's mind is, where what a landlord is saying, what a landlord is thinking, and then where the lender community is. And if you think of it maybe as a continuum, I think for more deals to happen, those that thinking and that deal making needs to kind of come together. So I think tenants have been very upfront around their needs, right? Out of necessity, they got to come to the table and say, hey, can you help me out right now, even in my current contract? Help me out with those pain points like parking, maybe some other amenities that I need in the short term. I think for the most part, landlords are trying to utilize traditional assumptions, their traditional underwriting. I think if you gave some of them some truth serum, their thoughts might be a little different than what they're saying, at least for now, to tenants. And then the lender community is one that I have the least dialogue with, and I'd love to hear more from them and understand more of what their motivating factors are. So again, just to kind of summarize that, until those different stakeholders can kind of come together, I think it is just going to be that point of transition, right, that we started off talking about.
Great. Well, Carlo, I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You have a great day.
Thanks.